Góðan daginn, komið þið sæl, gaman að sjá svona marga. Mín heiti ég og formaður Mannfræðifélags Íslands og að bjóða ykkur til þess að fá fylgja grindvesturs með Löfgren ásamt með félagi þjóðfræðinga á Íslandi og námsbraut í þjóðfræði og safnafræði. Og það er gaman að sjá svona marga og gaman líka að hafa tekist að fljúga hingað heim. Það tók svolítið langan tíma. Bara svona að finna réttan tíma og já. Það er nú aðeinslega verið Silja sem hefur skipulagt þetta, ég bara vil að það komið fram með svona verið bara svona í bakvarðarsveitinni. Við vorum tvær, ég og Björk Hólm sem stóðum í þessu. Hún byrjaði og ég tók við, það var mjög gott starf sem var á undan og já. En Valdimar Hafstein, hann ætlar að kynna Löfgren fyrir okkur, en við bjóðum hann bara velkominn.
Skipta bara strax á ensku. It is truly a great pleasure, Orvar, to introduce today's speaker. I've said that line before on a number of occasions. It's always been true, but I don't think it's ever been quite as true as it is today. So I'm thrilled to introduce Orvar Löfgren on his long overdue first visit to Iceland, and I congratulate the two professional associations, Félag Þjóðfræðinga og Mannfræðifélagið, on their excellent initiative to invite him here. Most of you here today are already familiar with Orvar and some of his work, and all of our students read books and essays by him in various courses. And it's always delightful to teach his work. It never fails to create eureka moments in class, opening up new perspectives on the familiar. It's safe to say, I think, that Orvar is one of the best-known ethnologists of our time. Certainly by far the best-known Nordic ethnologist, and for very good reason. No one has done more to shape and renew the field of European ethnology, þjóðfræði, in the past 40 years than he has. In collaboration often with his longtime colleagues and co-authors, Jonas Frykman and Billy Ehn, Orvar Löfgren was early on in his career the pioneer of what was back then known in the Nordic countries as the new ethnology, but is now simply known as ethnology. Always innovative, always exciting, always brilliant, Orvar, more than anyone else, has taken seriously ethnology's remit of exploring everyday life, as his latest book is called, to study the force of habit and to reveal the secret world of doing nothing, to quote the title of some of his other books. And he has written many of them, to say nothing of his over 100 articles, or of his time as the editor of Ethnologia Europea, the Journal of European Ethnology, an international flagship in the field, which Orvar gave a total makeover, turning an old and slightly dusty journal into a pioneering outlet for creative scholarship and innovative analyses of culture. Orvar's topics of research range far and wide, from material culture to daydreams, to the uses of media in everyday life, from cultural heritage and national culture to transnationalism and neoliberalism, or what used to be known as the new economy, from place, tourism and consumption to routines, stress and emotions, from railway stations and hotels via the suitcase to excess and overflow and always the home. The home, in many ways, is at the heart of the field of ethnology. It is where everyday life begins every morning and ends every night. The home is where we're trained into our habitus, our gender, our class, our way of life and view of the world. The home is where our emotions, our economies, our environment, our material, physical, social, and cultural being all come together. Orvar's work on the home spans his entire career, from his earliest work on the city and the country in the mid-70s, and especially in the book he wrote together with Jonas Frykman in 1979, then Kultivera the Människan, published in English as The Culture Builders, which marked the inauguration of the new ethnology in Scandinavia. A book that opened up new perspectives on the home, among other topics, and paved the way for a particular sort of approach to the ethnography of everyday life that he termed kulturanalyse, cultural analysis. Orvar has returned home time and again in his work since then, and it's the focus of his latest research project, part of which he presents today. So with much pleasure and without further ado, I give you Orvar Löfgren and the home as moral economy.
Oh boy, this is going to be hard to live up to. Anyway, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really ashamed that I haven't made it before. There's no excuse. But now I'm here and I've been enjoying it, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. So, let's talk about the home. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Good. I'm going to take you on a journey through some aspects of the emotional and material life of the home. And this journey really starts with IKEA, of course, because I was approached some time ago by IKEA, who wanted me to do workshops on life at home and do some other stuff for them. And I was really getting nervous because when I approached these guys, a very different culture, of course, than the university, I was thinking, what can I tell these guys? They know everything about the home. So I had to invent a project and tell them I was working on a theme called the invisible home. And then they got a little bit nervous because they were thinking, maybe we are missing something. But I was sort of forced into going to this, and the theme was to sort of look at affects, emotions, routines, silent agreements, activities, and stuff floating back and forth inside the home and going outside as well. So this is the project I'm going to touch on, and I would like to take a specific angle on it. I would like to discuss the way at home we learn to create the categories of mine, yours, or ours. And I'm going to have to tell you that this is ongoing research, so we'll be wandering through the terrain here and might sometimes get lost and see if I can get back again. So let's start. Mine, the small child says again and again with a broad, broad grin. It's one of the first words she has learned, and now she's using it everywhere. Not only my toys, but my grandma, my food. There's this intoxicating feeling of establishing borders and categories, taking command over people and over things. The teddy bear in an iron grip, or the arms around grandma's knees. Slowly she's socialized into the cultural field of mine, your or ours. And it's not an easy journey. Why aren't you allowed to take back something you just gave away to a friend? What if other kids also claim that this is my grandmother? And what's the difference between lending and giving away? The child is trained in the grammar of ownership, learn to have, possess, rule over, share, or borrow. And all this has a central role in the way in which a child explores the world and becomes an individual in dialogue with others. So if you ask people to remember how this socialization occurred as kids or parents, it can be conflicts about toys, negotiations about boundaries, forbidden or permitted activities. It can be memories of creating secrets of your own or exploring the private spaces of others. So I decided to start my study by looking at such processes. And my aim was to look at very mundane situations of mine and yours. Because this is, of course, a field that's been explored by philosophers, historians of ideas, psychologists, and others. What could an ethnologist contribute to this field? It seemed to me that the importance of everyday things, from routines to daydreams, often were lacking. There were sort of rather abstract discussions of the making of an ego or an understanding of me. So my approach was the sort of classical ethnological bricolage approach, combining a wide and rather eclectic range of materials, interviews and casual conversations, a number of surveys of life at home, advertisements, stuff from popular culture, but above all, reading a number of ethnographies of domestic life, where the theme of me and ours was not in focus, but it came drifting in all the time. And how would I approach this? Well, I mean, we have survived now for some decades the coming and going of analytical turns, as you know, starting with the textual turn, the cultural turn, the spatial turn, the material turn, the affective turn, the ontological turn, etc. And I think somehow we need a constant dialogue. What ways could we bring these turns into a dialogue? For example, the material and the affective. And I think this is where the interesting challenge lies. And so I'm working out from a concept by the geographer Doreen Massey, the concept of thrown togetherness. How do people, objects, feelings, sensibilities, time and place come to coexist in a certain given situation or context? I won't go into the theoretical and the methodological issues anymore, but I would like to tell you where I started. It often is a quote that gets you started. And I vaguely remembered a classic quote from the anthropologist Mary Douglas back in 1991. She asked, "What is a home?" Her answer is that it's not primarily a physical space with walls, roofs, doors, and windows. It's above all an internal order with its own rules, rhythms, and moral consideration. The home is made by intertwined routines, silent agreements, and ingrained reflexes about this is the way we do it here. The family or the household is the training ground in which basic norms about mine, yours, and ours are learned. And it's a concept where I think it's a place where the concept of moral economy could be used. Moral economy, coined by the British historian Edward Thompson way back in his discussion of early English working class culture. But the concept is meant to deal with situations and contexts where the rational laws of the market just don't rule all the time, where moral concerns or ideas are strongly embedded in social and economic relations. The home is everything the hotel is not. What did Mary Douglas write? And for a while I took a tour to the world of hotels because I think you could learn a lot about what a home is about by staying in hotels. And reading Mary Douglas, you can understand that she didn't have a very happy childhood. She's rather critical about the way this moral economy works. So in the hotel, you establish a contract between buyer and seller. You get what you pay for. The home, on the other hand, is somewhere where you share space, the remote control of the TV, food in the fridge, tasks, and many things. And at the same time, there are these constant negotiations about mine and yours. What am I entitled to? And what happens when household members have different ideas about where the line should be drawn? Different principles about fairness and routines are created. You have to learn to take turns, queue up, draw lots, exchange. The home is constructed around a very strong ours, things we have to do together and take responsibility for the good of all, a very problematic concept. Who took the last drop of milk without buying some new? Who keeps the light on or turns the thermostat up and up again? Who formulates such rules of solidarity where you may be more of a caretaker than an owner? At home, you have to synchronize routines and activities, but you also have to synchronize needs and interests, which may create tensions between my needs and the family good. There is often a vague we hovering in the background. Do we really need a new television, a bigger flat, or dessert for dinner? the home is a constant site of negotiation, wheeling and dealing, trying to make different priorities and interests work together. The moral economy of the home reflects different power positions and thus engages in questions of class, gender, and generation. And this moral economy is rarely visible in grand declarations about rules, rights, and duties. It is hidden in mundane situations, which explains why seemingly trivial objects, routines, or actions all of a sudden can result in a flare of effect, and power structures and hierarchies are reinforced in this or challenged. So how do you explore such a moral economy, which is often hidden in those silent agreements and rules taken for granted, but also in body movements and reactions? At home, you're constantly taught rules and routines, but they often become visible only when they are provoked or confronted with other kinds of moral economies. What kinds of rules apply at the neighbor's house or in grandma's home? There is this 11-year-old kid living in a collective who's at a neighbor's party. When the meatballs appear, he asks the hostess, "How many are you allowed to take?" as he has learned at home. But she smiles her broad middle-class smile and says, "But my dear, you may of course take as many as you want," and looks rather baffled as he loads up 14 pieces on his plate. Another concrete situation of learning is about commuting between home and the daycare center. At the daycare, there is a scarcity of mind and an abundance of hours. There is a sign. We ask parents not to let the children bring their own toys in the morning. It makes for conflict during play. At the daycare center, there is a tough training in learning to share activities and stuff. Especially striking is the learning and relearning which occurs among children who commute between homes of their divorced parents. There's a great Danish study about divorced kids who feel that they're moving between two moral economies, although they don't use the concept, but two atmospheres. Things are different here. There's a wonderful video sequence in this project where you see a 13-year-old girl has packed her things at her father's place. Now she's standing in front of her divorced mother's door. And she's got the key in the pocket, but she hesitates. Should she open the door or should she knock? And she knocks. This is not really her home, you know. And small situations like that are very charged. The hidden normality in learning or handling rules can also be problematized by looking at situations in which they don't seem to apply or constantly are questioned. A psychologist working at an institution for young women with drug problems meets persons who have a totally different view of mine and yours. If they want something, they don't hesitate to grab it, never ask. They have often grown up in homes where the boundaries between mine and yours constantly are transgressed, both by the drug-addicted parents or the siblings. For some, this leads to a constant jealous guarding of the little which is mine, because they know it can be taken away from me any minute. The staff learns the new rules. There is the cake carried in for the afternoon coffee by a new staff member. She's told, first you have to divide it into pieces, otherwise someone will just grab the whole cake. And in settings like this, it becomes obvious what happens when people don't share understandings of solidarity, empathy, generosity, or trust. So the home is full of boundaries between mine, yours, or ours. Some of these boundaries may be very visible and material. Others are more difficult to catch, ephemeral, stable, unstable, changing. In her study of privacy in everyday life, the sociologist Christina Nippert-Eng asks her informants what privacy means to them. she's getting different answer. It could be the power to control access to some things, places, or informations. Others stress the importance of being alone and left at peace. A few stress the freedom to live without regulations or restrictions. In a way, privacy and intimacy is interwoven here. Intimacy has a map in which the private is linked to the intimate. It means a focus on the innermost and often the domestic. Which corners, paths, or activities do people view as being very personal, something you should be careful about sharing or not sharing? Establishing private spaces, belongings, or activities is an important way of understanding how a child develops understandings of mind. We could do a history of the nursery, which is a very relatively young history. The idea, should a kid have a space of his or her own, and why should they have that? As children develop more private zones, as they grow up, the question is, when and how do parents have the right to enter these territories? How long may a mother go through the child's pockets or drawers? When are kids allowed to lock their room? Issues of mine or ours are under constant negotiation. Boundaries are created and challenged. This becomes very evident in teenage rooms, of course, where an anti-home can be developed with provocative colors and stuff, large posters, and even louder music. It should be quite clear who rules here. To make oneself private can be seen as a very personal and private individual activity, but it's highly colored and framed by cultural conventions, which we may learn from the constantly changing history of privacy. From Jean-Jacques Rousseau to Dr. Spock, there has been this endless debate on children's need for privacy, but also what parents are allowed to invade or not, which has changed from generation to generation. Ideas of mind are also linked to transformations of situations. Just take such a simple thing as the meal, in which the shared becomes mine or yours through that journey from the common bowl to the individual plate. As it's spooned onto your plate, it's changed into your food, not only your property, but your responsibility. You must finish your food on the plate, or you mustn't try to steal any meatballs from your sisters. We could take this journey further into a discussion of secrecy and the importance for children and grown-ups to create those secret spots and corners or activities. But I won't go into that now, but I would like to go into another stage of negotiation. Childhood is one laboratory. The later stage of coupling is another. To move together with a partner means changing mine and yours to ours. Our home, our furniture, our habits. Constantly, this new ours can regress back to mine and yours. Your taste, my stuff, your bad habits. There's this wonderful book by Jean-Claude Kaufmann where he looks at the first night, the first morning a new couple spends together, when they explore the home of the partner, you know. And in the beginning, he shows there's such a tolerance for your crazy ideas, your food habits, your routines. But as they start living together, there is not the same leniency. Danny Miller, the anthropologist, in his book Comfort of Things, presents couples living in London. And he's sort of interested in the way one can watch couples develop their relationships through the gradual merger of all sorts of items in the house. Books, CD collections, pictures on the wall. He says the things and not just the people start to take up residence with each other, which I think is interesting. And he finds there's a continuum of homes where he would say are his and her houses, his office, her office, his books, her books, his ornaments, her ornaments, or to homes where people always talk about ours all the time. There's also a well-known gender order emerging in Miller's interview. It's above all the work, interest, and taste of women which organizes most of the home. One informant, Charles, puts it like this: she's come in and rearranged my house. That's basically it. And she's imposed her will on my house. That's how it goes. Just because she's a woman, that's what happens. He sighs about all his male friends who witnesses the same development without reflecting a second about his own responsibility in this division of labor. For him, the solution is simple. You've just got to have a little shed somewhere, or my little room downstairs where you can shut the door and just have a little peace and quiet on my own, and just have my few things around me. This is echoed in a lovely book by an American study where men hide, where we look at these hiding places, the favorite chair, the car, the garage, or the garden shed. From a female perspective, it is often about not getting enough of recognition for housework done. The kitchen, I think, is a good example of this. It is a space which is produced and redone constantly in the routines and orders of the everyday. Every day, the kitchen is remade. It's also about aesthetics. I can't have it like this in my kitchen. You're not allowed to mess it up. A claim for ownership emerges. The kitchen may be ours, but it's above all mine because I put so much work and loving care into it. There are conflicts, for example, about the fridge. As one woman in a French study puts it, I get mad when someone has left a half-rotten cucumber in the vegetable box. In other cases, it's a man who gets mad, who's seen himself as taking responsibility for our home. For example, the family father who makes his nightly tour of turning off lights and lowering the heat and checking everything. In studies of conflicts between couples, the theme of mine, yours, or ours is played out in very different ways. Your bad habits, your dirty clothes on our floor, or fights about saving electricity. Like the Frenchman who says to his wife, do you think we live in Versailles? Next time you pay the electricity bill. There are sensitive issues, for example, of scarce resources that we should share in the household. Once upon a time, I remember the battles about access to the telephone, and even more important, quarrels over telephone bills, or who's taking up too much time in front of the shared TV or computer. There is the man who colonizes the sofa and the PlayStation, or the other man who jealously carries the remote control around with him, even into the bathroom. Such conflicts may be resolved when household members acquire their own media gadgets, so the market is doing a nice job here. But there are always new potential sources of irritation waiting. We could also study the way people try to develop corners of their own, islands of privacy or sharing. People would say, I always get up 1 hour earlier to have the kitchen and the whole house to myself. But this can also become a metaphor. You should have your own room, is what marriage therapists can say. To have your own room in a marriage is to have your own friends, your own activities. But I think the bedroom is a good place to start to look at the way couples handle this. In a Californian study of homemakers, there was much energy developed into redevelopment and making of master bedrooms. This was sort of a shared dream for many. Many talked about this as a sanctuary because they were living with small kids. The bedroom of the parents should be big, beautiful, quiet, and not a lot of stuff. Like a hotel room almost. But most of the day, the master bedroom was there, dark, empty, waiting. Having a bed of your own or even a bedroom of your own is of course also something that has a late history. In interviews about French couples, there's several that says, the bedroom is my territory. During the day, I use it because it's much more fun to eat or read or withdraw to that than being in the living room. There are others who say, you designed that wall, I designed that wall. This side of the bed is my side, this is yours. Jean-Claude Kaufmann, again, who's interviewed French couples about this, points out there are two basic ideas of modern life that tend to be confronted in the bedroom. In the bedroom, you make love, you quarrel, you daydream, you lie awake thinking about life. Here, the romantic idea of love and the couple are confronted with the idea of being an autonomous modern individual. And he explores the micro rituals and micro conflicts emerging here. So, turning back to the more general life at home again. In a study of feeling at home, Ida Winter follows Danish children through their home. Where, when, and how do they feel most at home? Most of them mention the bed in their own room. Here one is embraced by pillows and blankets, eating one's favorite sweets, listening to one's favorite music, texting or watching the screen. This is what Winter calls the sacred space for kids, the ultimate my territory. Children tell her that here they are in full control, deciding about their own space, their stuff. There's a bubble of self-care and coziness created, what the Danes love to call hygge, which is now, as you know, a big export commodity in the US and Britain. These middle-class kids take this for granted. But here the curiosity of the ethnologist is awakened. How did we get there? Maybe this road to this warm, comfortable world has a long and winding history. And where could we start to explore this? So if you turn to the cultural and political history of homemaking, the history of comfort and privacy, there's been these discussions how the weak conception of the self and the individual in the Middle Ages were related to the ways in which austerity, minimalism ruled in many settings, and how ideas of the home as something comfortable and cozy is developed parallel to these ideas about the self and the family during the last couple of centuries. There is a kind of historical topography of intimacy and privacy here, from precarious medieval retreats, a window corner, a clearing behind the barn, to the growth of a bourgeois landscape of private spaces and belongings. And if you turn, a good example of this transformation is found in Jane Austen's novels from early 19th century, where we can follow how these new ideas of my territory is intertwined with my belongings. In Jane Austen's novel Mansfield Park, we follow Fanny, who moves from a poor and crowded household with little place for privacy to the manor of her rich relatives. Here, she finally gets a room of her own to which she can withdraw. She might go there to find shelter or comfort among her belongings. flowers, books, clothes, which she has collected since early days. Here is her writing desk, which provides a space for creative imagination and self-reflection. If she doesn't feel like doing anything, she can just sit and daydream. There is hardly an object, Jane Austen says, which isn't linked to an interesting memory. The self and the objects form an alliance, and this making of a new awareness is a central theme in many of Jane Austen's novels. Her heroines need a space to retreat, a room to withdraw to when life becomes too much. There is a need to be alone with one's own feelings, and it's organized around new practices. To cuddle in one's own bed, to warm oneself with a favorite scarf, or to unlock the writing desk or the small chest in which the most personal and intimate is kept. A stack of letters, the souvenir lock of a hair, the miniature portrait, or other talismans. The objects become very personal and intimate belongings. They surround me, they give me room, a distinct flavor. Stuff, personal stuff, lives in a rhythm with a person. In Fanny's childhood, there was neither a private room nor a private bed. Her move into something of her own is part of this transformation, this slow transformation of the view of the home and the individual, which emerges in early modern Europe, especially in upper-class settings of the 17th and 18th century. It's a classic theme, been explored by a wide range of scholars, from historians like Philippe Ariès and Norbert Elias, to later scholars like Michel Foucault, Anthony Giddens, and Richard Sennett. The history of privacy and intimacy. It contains several lines of inquiry using different concepts: increased individualization, heightened self-awareness, the establishment of a stronger ego. Such developments have been described in a heightened need to be alone, and the history of the need to be alone is interesting in itself. To be alone and have time for self-reflection is materialized in a need to withdraw, to be left to oneself, to be one's own master. When, where, and how is this gradual transformation visible? How are new boundaries between the individual and the collective established? People start sharing eating bowls. People want to sleep alone in their own bed, to have control over a space of one's own, to have personal belongings. And as the historian Orest Raynham puts it, the significance of having clothing, a bed, or a rosary of one's own went beyond mere ownership. And there's this little chest, the personal chest, that can be locked, not to prevent thieves, but to acquire privacy. There's a history of writing diaries, of reading novels, of daydreaming coming in here. And it's a heavily gendered development. What do male and female spaces of personal life look like? Of course, it's not only gender, but above all class. For many people, even at the beginning of the 20th century, personal belongings were very few. They could perhaps even be put in a pocket. So we have here a history which moves at different rates. And we could follow the way that these spaces also are gendered. I'll come back to that. It's also about feelings, and feelings that might be hard to verbalize. The Nobel Prize winner Herta Müller remembers her childhood in a poor village in Romania after the Second World War. Here, she says, you never talked in terms of mine or ours. You never put words to feelings about the home in that way. And she writes, maybe the feeling of togetherness was so strong that one did not experience that feeling. It was normal for everyone to belong together. One did not express it with words and gestures. It was something obvious and clear. One sits together at the table, uses the same door, the same cutlery and pots, Our clothes hang together on the washing line. We belong together. This is what outer things guarantee. That one could speak of oneself was something I first found out later when I moved to town. And I'd like to compare this to an interesting ethnography about class and daycare centers in New York by the anthropologist Adri Casuro, who points out that the idea of the ego and the self is produced so differently. She compared these 4 daycare centers, upper class from lower working class. At one end of the continuum, there's very little discussion about kids needing privacy. In these working class settings, what kids have to learn is to be tough, to take care of themselves, to keep away from others, to protect their territory. But that they should be given any certain privacy at home is not discussed. Among the upper class families in Manhattan, there was another form of individualism. A lot of talk of the need for autonomy and a private sphere of your own. Privacy, she writes, was thought to help and develop and construct individuality, unique tastes, desires and feelings, as well as confidence and assertiveness. Already a 3-year-old must have possibilities to create a private sphere, his or her own room, own stuff, own thoughts. The child is here seen as a flower which must be given all opportunities to develop in its own ways. And this is part of a longer history of career making, of becoming an assertive, creative person. And the idea of creativity and autonomy are joined together in this discussion. So we could continue to reflect about the way class and gender works here. But I would like to start drawing some of these wanderings together. So what did I learn so far? First of all, I think I learned the importance of combining processes of materialization and emotionalization. For me, this has been a study again of Doreen Massey's thrown togetherness. How do objects, people, feelings, sensibilities or activities, time dimensions come to coexist? Her concept explores the ways in which diverse elements come to cohabit in a given setting or situation, often as unexpected neighbors. There's another good analytical concept by Jane Bennett, that stuff thrown together creates a confederate agency or a vibrant assemblage. The stuff in Fanny's room in the manor started working together with her in interesting ways. And I cannot help thinking about Jean-Claude Kaufmann's study of the handbag as a private territory, a private space, which also has this microdynamics of things starting to cohabit and also become secret in the way that they weren't others. Things are united into my world, they cohabit, they mix, they blend, they co-educate, they change together. And we could use different cultural containers to study that. My room, our sofa, which is a great important cultural container in many homes. So much about stuff and effect. What about the moral economy then? I've approached this topic through discussions of objects, tastes, habits. And I think it's important to look at the wider cultural map of ownership and personal belongings. And how do ownership, control, and sharing together work with ideas and practices of intimacy, privacy, and secrecy? The home becomes an arena for constant negotiations where different priorities and interests must coexist. And here it's possible to follow the strong emotional charge or moral charge of mine or ours. It is from such charges that mine, yours, or ours fetches its cultural strength. In a way, all these words have a similar power to the classical cultural dichotomy of we and them, a polarity which creates Gemeinschaft inwards and separates outwards. We is constantly mirrored in those others. Mine or ours is permitted by a moral dimension of control and togetherness, inclusion and exclusion. Adding the little label mine or ours can recharge a situation or a relation in a split second. My children, your hopeless kids, your dirty linen on the floor, your responsibility, not mine. Strong feelings ranging from ugly feelings like frustration or cold scorn, or warming sentiments like a romantic we, are put to work in seemingly trivial everyday situations. By changing ours to yours, a relation is redefined. Not my problem, your problem. But mine and ours can also be used as effective excluding techniques. My chair, my room, my needs. You're not part of this. You're just a guest, a visitor. You might be an intruder in my life. On the other hand, people can be invited to join this ours, sharing our things, resources, and activities. A new ours is materialized. So my point is that we need to focus on the microphysics of these processes, which have a strong material and emotional dimension. And this is often what I find missing in the more loftier debates about the social, cultural, and political organization of individual autonomy, self-awareness in the making of the modern self. As I've shown, the notions of me and ours fetches its strength from the way in which the self is intertwined with objects and practices, which become more and more personal. They are part of what Russell Belk has called the extended self. My material world is a result of a slow adaptation. Living, thinking with, and handling them makes them a part of me. I think such transformations are crucial also for understanding the changing ways of domestic consumption during the last 2 centuries. How is it linked not only to questions of personal needs and control, but also of notions of personality and individualism? And if we look at the history of domestic consumption, we can see some developments here. We can first of all see some interesting tensions in parallel developments. During the 19th century, the family was idealized in new ways, which created a different and a very strong kind of we, the family as a haven united against the world. But this runs parallel with an increased individualizations. At this intersection of those two trends were the children. They should be taught to become autonomous individuals in middle-class settings and at the same part of a strong family identity. There's an interesting constant conflict between home and the individual. In her study of home possessions in England during the last 2 centuries, Deborah Cohen has shown how strongly homemaking was tied to an idea of domestic moral economy. Beautiful things, emotional and caring investments in the home were given a strong moral charge. They were a good home. And there was a lot of guilt produced in not having a home good enough. A century later, we can see how the family as a common project is anchored in concrete everyday activities. The couple is united in a shared interest in home design. There are the family trips to IKEA. There is our television sofa, our dining table. Objects unite. The moral dimensions in life at home has had a varying strength and focus in different contexts and eras. During the interwar years of the 20th century, there was a strong focus in domestic science and childcare, how children should be turned into good, independent individuals. During later decades, we have seen other dimensions in this individualization, with an even stronger focus on individual needs and rights in the family. One result of this is there's much more discussion now about what is fair or not. What kinds of rights can a child or an adult claim to space, belongings, and interest? My need for privacy. The second tension is about the couple and the individuality. The notion of the romantic, idealized couple united against the world is also a strong element in 19th century life. But at the same time, there's also a strong genderization of the couple. His and hers world is supposed to be complementing each other, which also created interesting market opportunities when the market discovered that you could start naming stuff his or hers and sell 2 hairbrushes instead of 1, or children's hairbrushes. There is a marvelous study of the making of a his and her market during the 19th century. There was also the idea of personalized consumption, as an English art critic wrote in 1871. We get so attached to some pieces of furniture that they become to us as if endowed with a kind of affection themselves. And we half believe not only that we love them, but that they love us. He reported from the era of intense domestic, expansive consumption in Victorian middle-class life. And the newfangled concept of personality in this period became, Deborah Cohen argues, fundamentally intertwined with the domestic interior. Me as a person and us as a family should be mirrored in consumption and investments in objects. And I think, again, the genderization issue is interesting. The social historian Leonor Davidoff has done this marvelous study of how everyday life was genderized in late 18th and early 19th century in Britain. Objects and activities and settings were increasingly described in gender terms. This is a very female color. This is a very male room. This is a manly activity, to which the market, of course, responded. As the home was seen both as a shelter and a showroom, interior decoration became a fast-growing sector in the late 19th and early 20th century. Again, the tension between the home and the individual also carried this personalization of belongings. And we could discuss how the market has developed or worked with this further in the later years. My argument here is that there's no simple unilinear process in developing these kinds of self-understandings and materializing them and emotionalizing them in different ways. We need to explore different routes, different ways of transformation over time. It's not a simple one-way road. We must explore the ways in which an extended self could be a way of fortifying yourself or thinning out yourself according to factors like gender and class. But my argument is that we really need to take the help of a historical analysis here. So what I've tried to do then is to discuss the processes of materiality and emotionality as a constant dynamics. And I would like to point out also that we must remember that there is an extremely strong haptic dimension of handling stuff, handling also emotions through stuff. So I would like to end here with the way the author Pablo Neruda expressed it in a poem. He tries to remember his belongings way back home, and he writes like this: "They told me many things, everything. Not only did they touch me and take the hand I gave them, but they were bound to my life in such a way that they lived in me and were such a living part of me that they shared half of my life and will die half of my death." Thank you.
Thank you, Orvar, for a very inspiring talk. I think you made amply clear that my introduction was in fact understated. Your talk recalled another work of yours from years ago in Livets Etnologi, where you described an ethnologiska handlaget, the ethnological touch or craft, which consists, you say there, of several things that show up. The great focus on everyday life and everyday things, the eclectic use of different sources, as we saw in your talk, from things to interviews to ethnographies to documents to biographies to novels to television. The pivoting back and forth so clear between ethnography of the present and the cultural historical perspective, and the importance of historical depth in ethnological analysis. And also clear from your talk is this centrifugal force of the discipline, which is constantly seeking good ideas and concepts wherever they are found, not just with other ethnologists, though there also, but also historians, anthropologists, sociologists, novelists, whatever. So I thought it was a wonderful showcase of this, in fact. But the first question, since I have the floor, I will take the opportunity, on the development of, you say, which is not unilinear, but I wonder nonetheless, is the home really, as we so often hear, moving from ours to mine and yours, in the sense that we have the increased privatization of spaces, the increased personalization of technology? Is that really an empirical development, or is that a moral panic that we have coming up again and again?
I think it's a classic moral panic, because this has been really argued for at least 150 years, that the family is split apart, they're hiding in their own rooms, writing in their diaries or watching, using their smartphones, depending on the technology. So I think you're right that we have to be really careful here. And I think there was a lot of talk about the sofa being deserted because people had their own television elsewhere. Now the sofa is crowded again, but everybody sits with their own gadgets. And there's these discussions, should you be allowed to have earplugs in the sofa? There is this constant fear of the family falling apart, and it simply is not. It's like the nation, an extremely stubborn institution, although we tried to weaken it. No, I think that's important.
So the floor is open. Raise your hand and introduce yourself for the question, please. I'm also happy to translate, if you like.
My Icelandic is getting better and better.
Over.
You talk about hers and his.
Yes.
What about his and his, or hers and hers?
Mm-hmm.
When you have a household with a couple that are
Mm-hmm.
two females or
Mm-hmm.
two males.
I think it's really important to go to such cases, because they provoke many of the ideas of the nuclear family and the way arrangement, because we're always having this ideal model. And I think there's some very good ethnographies of this. I mean, what becomes visible or perhaps more charged when there are two men living together or two women. So the whole field of queer studies is sort of there's a constant need to provoke the existing stereotypes. So I've read a couple of studies that I really felt were eye-openers like that. I mean, you could take any example and change the gender. What would happen to the discussion? Yeah. Who takes control, she or she? So I think that's very important. I wish I could have some beautiful example, but I can't remember it now.
Hi, my name is Gerður. I was wondering about, when you were talking about you were talking about the invention of privacy and of self-awareness and all that in the maybe last 200-300 years. And I was just wondering if, what about, were these concepts or terms known before that? Has that been looked into? Was it known in the Greeks or Egypt or medieval times?
There is this wonderful 5-volume French history of the history of privacy. And somehow one can feel that words like privacy, personality, intimacy don't travel very well through history because they can mean totally different things. So I think there's a trap there that one has to watch out for. But you know what also struck me was that the volumes about the 19th and 20th century of that big project was pretty uninteresting. The interesting part was the one that dealt with the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, when these ideas were transformed and people discussed them. Why should you be alone? What's being alone good for? In the 19th and 20th century, this was already taken for granted. And again, going to the Roman period or even going, as the anthropologists know, go to cultures who have a totally different version of this. But I leave that to the specialists. So I think it's very important. Are we really talking about the same thing here, using the word?
I'm thinking about this concept that you were using from Massey of togetherness.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that might be useful for studying museums as well. Because as I see it, the way you sort of at least describe it, because I don't know it myself, that it might be useful for studying museums, because I see museums as a space in a way where objects have been thrown together, sometimes in a very structured way, but also often just sort of, from chance.
Doreen Massey has written not all that much, but about this. But I thought I really loved the concept because it set me thinking, and I used it in a study of Copenhagen railway station as a sort of a parallel to her own discussion. So, of course, what I think. Another concept that could be brought in is the concept of cultural containers, that there are some phenomena that are contained. A museum would be a good example, a suitcase, a home, even more ephemeral things, that they have the job of containing, of forcing stuff together, creating an outside and an inside. And what happens in a museum, in a suitcase, in a living room as things are forced to cohabit. How do they transform each other? So the museum would be fine.
So I was also thinking about the interesting and sensitive position of the house guest and levels of transparency and hospitality. How long are you welcome within the household? And when are you meant to leave and so forth. And I was wondering if this is something that's parallel in many ways to the ethnographer. He's always a guest in someone else's space. And a recent case came up with a colleague where he was actually thrown out of the house where he was doing his ethnography and working. So I'm asking for a friend this week. So, do you think that this is fertile ground for an ethnographer to work on?
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that they go outstay their welcome in locations, but is this something that can be worked with methodologically and theoretically?
I was thinking of that famous collection of folk sayings, Peder Lalles Ordspråksbok. Danish, probably Irish material of it from the Middle Ages, and it says, after 3 days, fish and guests starts to smell. And I think many of us has experienced these parallel processes. No, I think house guests is a really great topic here, and I'm thinking of, I think it's Jacques Derrida who wrote about the hospitality as a problematic analytical concept, you know, because who's in control here and who's in power or authority. And of course, questions of mine or ours are constantly confronted here. What happens when you turn from a guest to a constant lodger, or a lodger is relabeled as just a guest? Remember, you're just a guest here. Yeah? No, that would be fruitful.
There was a wonderful study here, actually, an MA thesis a couple of years back on couch surfing from just
Yeah.
that perspective. Svante Zayas doctor is not here today. Is there another question in the room?
Maybe one short question. My name is Quintara, I'm a human geographer. On the note of methodology, I mean, how do you study the home? Have you been studying this, do you go into homes yourself, or do you do this by just speculation by your desk?
Yeah, I just sit at my desk and well, actually that's I think still an important part of it. No, but I mean there are. I think a good technology is the walk along interview. You know, it's much more fun to do an interview in the home, handling stuff, than sitting somewhere else. So interviews become important here. I also found, working with IKEA, that there were these enormous surveys, you know, where they sort of followed home after home and did videos and whatever. Such a rich material in a way that was waiting there. So I think the combination is, but really the walk along, to talk with people and their objects was helpful here. And Jean-Claude Kaufmann, this dangerous sociologist, he's accused of being lazy sometimes because he did a book just on email conversations, you know, quarrels between couples, and it turned out that women were so ready to start a dialogue with him, telling them about situations of their hopeless husbands. No, but I mean, there are many questions, and how do different methodological approaches confront each other or problematize each other? Yeah.
On that note, Orvar, I will give the final word to Silja, before we thank you properly.
I'll have to stand like this. Yeah. Oh boy, something is hiding here. All right, my suitcase.
So this is kind of a suitcase of Iceland.
Thank you.
Although I didn't manage to pack it this, of course, it's not the whole of Iceland. You can't do
Oh, it's plenty of Iceland. Lava, eternity, and wind. Lovely.
And of
Yeah.
course, you have to have the puffin.
The puffin.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just had smoked puffin. I thought that was sort of a crime, but it turned out. So I'll never look at that bird with the same eyes again. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.